Aerith the Serenite Pictures presents The Sleeping Cetra audiobook. Chapter 3. A Distant Meeting.
Several years later, 15-year-old Aerith awoke as the sun touched her face. Her emerald green eyes fluttered open as she heard the birds chirping and the smell of breakfast cooking. She stretched out as she pushed herself into a sitting position. Her long brown hair fell down to the bed in cascades. She looked outside to the beautiful day with a smile on her lips. She pushed her fluffy white covers off her and slipped out of her bed. She quickly washed up and dressed. She chose a simple pink dress. She rummaged at her vanity, finding a brush and hair tie. On her 5th birthday, Tifa gave her a pink ribbon and a white materia, saying she was old enough to take care of it. This was the only thing she knew that belonged to her mother. She tied her hair in the braid, using the pink ribbon while securing the materia in it. The young girl stepped out of her room and into the kitchen where she saw her Aunt Tifa cooking. Her Aunt Yuffie was fiddling with a large weapon she possessed. It was essential for her guardians to have weapons, just in case a stray fiend came near the cottage for protection, although that rarely happened to them. Her Uncle Barrett was grumbling for food, annoyed that Tifa was taking forever. Tifa was annoyed with Barrett's whining. Aerith smiled as she entered the room. She loved her aunts and uncle very much.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Oh, Aerith, we'd be fine if Barrett would quit whining.
Well, if you wouldn't take so damn long to make breakfast, I wouldn't be whining.
Will you two shut up?
Aerith smiled at her family. With her aunts and uncle around, there was never a dull moment. They argued a lot, but that was normal. She watched as Tifa hastily dropped Barrett's breakfast in front of him. She let out a noise, and then went back to bring Yuffie and Aerith their plates. Instead of taking a seat at the table, Aerith went into a closet and brought out a basket, a small shovel, and a long piece of cloth.
Aerith, come and eat breakfast before it gets cold.
I'll be right there. I have to get my things ready so I can leave. Are you going out again in the woods? Yes. Some of the flowers started to bud, even in this chilly weather.
Aerith, are you sure you should go out?
I went out a few days ago, and the weather's not so bad.
Maybe someone should go with you.
She knew what was coming next. The 3 rules that they always told her when she was about to leave the house alone.
I'm fine, Aunt Tifa. No wandering too far.
Be careful of wild animals.
And no talking to strangers.
Tifa said as Aerith quietly mouthed the rules to herself. After all, she heard them a dozen times, and then some. Aerith quickly went into the cupboards to get some food, so she could eat if she got hungry being out. She wrapped some bread, an apple, and other things in the cloth, then placed it safely in her basket.
Aerith, worry about that later. Come eat before your uncle eats your food as well.
Tifa ordered, noticing Barrett eyeing her plate. Barrett reached over with his fork to grab an egg when Yuffie smacked his hand. Barrett let out a growl and glared at Yuffie, who was fiddling with her weapon. Aerith smiled and grabbed a piece of toast and took a bite. She then gave her uncle her plate.
I'm going to head out now. I'll be back later. Take the healing materia with you.
Aerith nodded and took the materia. She kissed her uncle on the head and hugged her aunts goodbye. Quickly, she grabbed her basket and placed on her brown boots. She grabbed a rose-colored coat and placed it on. Then she bid her family goodbye and headed out into the chilly air. When she was gone, Tifa stared at the door.
5 more days. 5 more days until Aerith is 16.
It seems like just yesterday we came here.
I still get this horrible feeling, though, that Sephiroth will find her, and the curse is going to come true.
Don't jinx us. We made it this far, and in 5 more days, Aerith will return home and...
Barrett trailed off, looking down at his plate, now bare. His eyes looked sad, the same with Yuffie and Tifa. After 16 years of watching over Aerith, they grew to love her so much like their own daughter. Now the time was winding down. Yet, despite the relief it would bring them much sadness. Aerith walked the familiar path through the forest, the rays of the sun peeking through the leaves. Her eyes traveled around the forest, looking around at the trees with the leaves beginning to bud. Soon the flowers would bloom, and the forest would look as beautiful as it always did. Aerith stopped walking when she came to a small grove near a river. A small patch of flower stems poked out of the ground, waiting for the time to bloom. She sat down, making herself comfortable. Behind her, she could hear something rustling in the bushes. She was not frightened, however. She continued her own business when the creature jumped out, letting out a loud growl.
Hello, Sif.
Without looking up, Kate Sith jumped up and down on his giant Moogle, annoyed. He clearly wanted to surprise her, but failed.
Nah, no fair.
You're much too noisy. Anyone could hear you from a mile away.
Red 13 found a spot near Aerith to lie down, his nose sniffing at her basket. Kate Sith noticed the basket and jumped off his Moogle and landed inside. He opened the cloth to find the food.
Hey, that's for later. And I don't have that much.
Ah, that's not fair. You should have taken more.
My aunts and uncle don't know about you, remember? Rule number 2 is careful of wild animals. If I even try to introduce you to them, they will kill first and ask questions later.
Red 13 snuffed, shifting uncontrollably next to the brown-haired girl. She patted his head gently, knowing fully well Red 13 was not partial to humans, except Aerith. When he was younger, Red 13 had been torn away from his mother and experimented on and had vile things done to him. One day, with the help of Kate Sith, who too was trapped, escaped and landed in the forest. Red 13 trusted Aerith, seeing her gentle spirit in her eyes.
The flowers are going to be so beautiful when they bloom.
Aerith smiled as she took out her scoop and began fixing the patch of flowers. She plucked out the weeds and packed the dirt nicely. She even went and got water for them, since, after all, she was near a river. Around noon, the young girl sat down for a break, tired of her work. Red 13 and Kate Sith kept her company, as they always did when she was out in the forest. The two had become protective of the girl. Aerith undid the cloth, placing the food neatly on it for her and her friends to eat. However, she was not feeling hungry at all.
Is something wrong?
You, look down.
I'm just thinking.
The two animals perked up and looked at her, and patted them gently.
I'm going to be 16 in a few days. But I love my family, and I love you too as well, but I feel so... alone here.
Aerith stood up and walked over to the river, now that it was a gentle flow. She could see little fish in the river swimming past her reflection.
All my life, I lived in this forest, without any friends like me. I have always wanted someone my own age to play games with me, to talk to, and such. But with Uncle Barrett, Aunt Tifa, and Aunt Yuffie, I'd never been able to meet someone. They worry so much for me. And nothing bad has ever happened to me.
Except that one time you fell into the river.
Okay, one time.
What about that time you had a pack of wolves chase after you?
And what about that time you nearly fell into the ditch with sharp rocks? Mind you, I almost fell in with you.
Okay, so I got into a little mischief. But can you blame me? I just want to run away from here so I can see what's behind this forest. I want to go into that village with that giant castle and see all the people, and maybe even the king and queen. I just want to live out there, even if it were just for one day. I would give anything just to have that.
Aerith plopped down on the grass and stared sadly at her reflection. For the past few years, Aerith had wished for one thing, for someone to come and take her away. She sighed and looked off in the distance. She could see the high towers of the royal palace.
Someday, I'll run there and meet someone who will be my prince and protect me. So my aunt and uncle won't have to worry for me anymore.
Long ago, Aerith realized she could never be a princess, a peasant like her. Her uncle merely humored her as a child to make her happy. Red 13 rubbed his head against Aerith's shoulder affectionately. Kate Sith touched her arm gently, getting her attention. Without warning, she embraced the two of them, grateful for their comfort.
Hey, Aerith, why don't you sing a song? That always cheers you up.
Aerith smiled and nodded. She thought for a moment of a song. She hummed for a moment, getting the tune, and opened her mouth, letting the melody float across the wind.
Prince Zack, have you seen your brother? He is late for his lessons again.
A young servant girl called out. She had short blonde hair and blue eyes. Prince Zack, now a man, was dressed in fine clothing and donning a princely crown on his head. His black hair, however, was still unruly as it always had been. The older prince shrugged his broad shoulders.
He might be out at Sir Sid's place. Cloud likes watching that man attempt to fly that silly plane of his.
The servant girl sighed with dismay. Cloud was notorious for running off and avoiding his studies. Normally, he would run off early in the morning, taking his prized golden chocobo with him.
Her Highness will not be pleased to hear this.
Cloud is Cloud. Try not to worry, Elena.
As he sat down at his desk, reading over important history notes about the country he would rule.
I would not have to worry if I was not the one who had to tell your mother, the Queen.
Zack had an uncomfortable look on his face. His mother was very firm and strict. Of course, Zack and Cloud broke the rules all the time when they were younger. Zack grew out of it. He had to take on the responsibility of ruling Nibelheim, but Cloud did not take his news of marrying the Cetra princess on good terms. After all, in just a few days, he would be meeting his future bride. What annoyed Cloud was that no one but the king and queen of Cetra knew why the princess was not in the palace. Elena walked to the throne room where the queen was seated. Elena walked up to her and gave her a respectful bow. When the queen nodded in approval, Elena looked up. Next to the queen was her advisor, Zen, whom Elena was smitten with, and it showed. However, now is not the time for that. She told the queen the news about Cloud disappearing again. The queen glared at Elena.
He ran off again? I should place guards at his door.
Maybe you should send the guards to bring him back. At least send out the captain to find him.
Yes, perhaps we could send Sir Vincent after him. Tseng, will you give the message to the captain?
Zen nodded, giving her a bow, and left the room without a word. Prince Cloud, however, was nowhere in Nibelheim. Early in the morning, he dressed in his riding uniform, a dark plum shirt and black pants with boots. He strapped on his shoulder guard on his left shoulder, placed his large sword, the Buster Blade, on his back, and leapt with his chocobo. As of late, he had grown more and more uneasy. The news of the princess of the Cetra returning soon brought to him closer to the realization his life would never be his own. How long would it be until he would be forced to marry a woman he never met and probably would never like? Cloud stopped his chocobo. After all, they had been riding all morning. He slipped off his back, allowing the golden bird to rest. He rubbed his beak, allowing his gloved hands to run along its feathery face. Cloud let out a frustrated sigh. His chocobo tenderly nudged him with his beak.
Seems like I'm always running, huh?
Cloud was now older, handsome, and had a shirt with wild, spiky blonde locks. He looked quite handsome, just like a prince, but his attitude was not what was expected of him.
I wonder how long until Mother has Vincent coming after me. No matter how far I run, I just cannot get anywhere. Why do I have to be the one to marry a princess? I bet she is stuck-up, snobbish, ugly, and an airhead like every other princess.
Cloud reached into his bag strapped on the chocobo saddle and pulled out a green silkus, one of the best foods for a chocobo. The bird gobbled it up right out of Cloud's hand and chirped happily. The young prince patted his pet and sat down on the ground, stabbing his sword into it before he sat.
You know, Choco, I really thought I was the lucky one. I thought I would be able to live my own life. Maybe if I'm lucky, Sid will get his ship flyable and I can escape and see the world.
Cloud watched as the bird turned its head slightly and let out a noise. Cloud leaned back against a tree. A cool breeze touched his skin, sending a shiver down him. Yet, it also brought the gentle sound of a melody.
Alone for a while, I've been searching through the dark for traces of the love you left inside my lonely heart. To with my picking up the pieces that remain, melodies of life, love's lost refrain.
Cloud looked up as he heard the beautiful voice sing. He looked at Choco and tied him carefully to a tree branch so he would not run off. The voice was so beautiful and soothing, like an angel. Who would be singing in the middle of a forest? There were fiends roaming around here, and that voice was definitely a girl's.
Our paths they did cross, though I cannot say just why. We met, we laughed, we held on fast, and then we said goodbye. And who hear the echoes of stories never told? Let them ring out loud till they unfold.
Cloud followed the voice, trying to find where it was coming from. He could hear the voice getting louder as he drew closer. It was captivating, actually.
In my dearest memories, I see you reaching out to me. Though you're gone, I still believe that you can call out my name.
Cloud stopped for a moment, trying to pinpoint the voice. He closed his eyes, wondering what the noise was exactly coming from. He listened carefully, and when he was sure, he was on the move again.
A voice from the past, joining yours and mine, adding up the layers of harmony. And so it goes on and on.
He was close, and he knew it. He pushed his way through the bushes and found himself on top of a hill. He looked around and saw a long ways down, sitting by a river, a girl. One with long brown locks tied back in a braid with a pink bow. She was singing so beautifully. Cloud watched, holding onto a branch to keep him from rolling down the hill.
Melodies of life, to the sky beyond the flying birds, forever and beyond.
Her voice traveled to his ear. She sounded so beautiful that even angels would be jealous. When Cloud tried to get a better look at her, he felt the branch he was holding onto give away and snap. The Iron Prince fell and went sliding down, hitting rocks, tree roots, and anything else in his path. As Aerith said the last word, she could hear crashing. The next thing she knew, she saw a body fall in the patch of flowers. Aerith jumped up, clearly startled. Red 13 and Cage Sith placed their bodies in front of her. However, the intruder did not move. Aerith stared, but when she did not see him move, she approached him.
Be careful.
Aerith knelt down, pushed the man over on his back, and gasped. He had a large gash across his head. Despite that, he was a very handsome man. She felt herself stop breathing. Snapping out of her daze, she looked around. Aerith hurried to the basket to retrieve her healing materia and returned to the man's side.
Aerith, get away!
I can't leave him. He is hurt badly. Here. Please, wake up.
Don't touch him! He could be bad.
I don't think he is.
He's a human!
So am I. I don't think any harm will come out of that.
As the three argued, none of them noticed Cloud's face stir. His eyebrows furrowed as he slowly opened his eyes. When he first opened them, his vision was funny, not to mention he had a bad headache after hitting his head. He blinked a few more times until he finally saw clearly the woman he had been spying on from on top of the hill, as well as her companions. Cloud let out a groan instantly, getting their attention. He sat up suddenly and turned his bright blue eyes toward the girl. When their eyes met, the two froze. Aerith had never seen another person outside her family. Not knowing what to say, Aerith did the first thing that came to her mind: run. She got up from her spot and ran.
Wait!
He reached out to grab her, but instead caught the ribbon on her hair. Her brown locks went falling down in cascades as she ran. Cloud tried to get up, but he felt something knock into him. Red 13 had purposely knocked him down. The red beast let out a growl, warning Cloud to back off. He looked up to see Kate Sith and Red 13 running after Aerith. Cloud grimaced as he tried to get up, but his body was sore. Sitting back on the ground, he looked down at his hand at the pink ribbon he had. Next to him was a pure white materia. He picked it up and frowned. The girl dropped her things, and he had no idea where to find her. Aerith ran until she was deep in the forest near her house. She stopped to catch her breath as Red 13 and Kate Sith met with her. Red 13 placed down Aerith's basket, which she picked up when they escaped. It was then that Aerith noticed her ribbon was gone. She pressed her hand to the back of her head.
My ribbon! I'm in materia! I have to find it!
You can't go back there!
The ribbon and materia had belonged to her mother. On her 5th birthday, she was given it, thinking she was responsible enough to have it. She felt tears form in her eyes. Something she cherished was gone.
I have to find my ribbon!
But before she could go, she felt a drop of rain hit her. Aerith frowned. There is no way she could find it if it was raining.
We'll look for it tomorrow. We'll help you. Now hurry home before your family gets worried about you.
Aerith nodded and grabbed her basket. She only hoped she could find her ribbon and materia in the morning. Yet, in the back of her mind, she was wondering whom that man was.